The ways we live our lives, design our communities, and move around within those communities are all intimately connected to the ecological health of the planet. Most North American cities are designed around the automobile, or at least cars have come to dominate these urban landscapes. There are a few cities in the world more closely associated with the automobile than Detroit, Michigan, Motown. But the privileging of cars in Motor City and other cities around the country and around the globe has had dramatic costs, from polluted air and water and a high number of traffic fatalities to transportation inequality and high levels of carbon pollution. The Detroit Greenways Coalition is looking to change all that, right in the heart of the world's automotive power center. Todd Scott is the executive director of the Detroit Greenways Coalition, and he joins me to discuss how their work promoting greenways throughout the city is improving people's health and happiness, beautifying a very industrial city, reducing inequality and climate impacts, and a whole host of other benefits, even economic development. This is a tale about Detroit. But if this work can happen in Motor City, it can happen anywhere. And Todd's stories will inspire you to go outside, find some green space and some fresh air, meet your neighbors, and explore wherever it is you live. I'm John Fiege, and this is Chrysalis. You can subscribe at johnfiege.earth, where you will also find show notes and all episodes of the podcast, plus my writing, photographs, and films. Here is Todd Scott. Can you start by telling me a bit about the work you do at Detroit Greenways and how you came to be involved in this kind of work in this particular organization?
Sure. I think we have a kind of a unique beginning. It happened when the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan made funding available for cities in Southeast Michigan to apply for bigger federal and state grants. And at the time, the city of Detroit, this was before bankruptcy, and the city of Detroit really wasn't looking to add trails, but a lot of the nonprofits were. They saw that the nonprofits felt that building greenways was one way to revitalize the neighborhoods. And so they got this funding, they started building trails, and then they ran into these common issues about how do we maintain them? How do we get insurance for them? And so the Community Foundation, along with Michigan Trails and Greenways Alliance, brought these groups together starting in 2007. And they met informally, and that grew into the Detroit Greenways Coalition. In 2008, I came in part-time to assist with that, and then I went full-time. And since then, the city of Detroit, of course, has gone through bankruptcy, and they've gotten much more invested into the trails and greenways, and even the improving streets for biking and walking. So we've kind of, in some ways, backed out of that area a little bit in terms of leading the construction, but we're still very much involved with advocacy and making sure there's good community engagement. And we're always looking for new trails that we can push for the city to get involved with and get constructed. And then another big aspect, I guess, two other big aspects. One would be safety. And we're really involved with road safety, because if the roads aren't safe, people aren't going to walk and bike. And we've also gotten involved with climate action as well. We see biking and walking as one way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and we think there should be greater investment in safer biking and walking opportunities to help improve the planet's outlook.
Awesome. And what brought you to this work, and are you a cyclist? Are you what's your background?
Yeah, so I started as a cyclist. I'm still a cyclist. I used to race mountain bikes, and then I kind of felt like I did everything. So I started getting into running and ultra running, and love being on trails. I was involved with the Michigan Mountain Biking Association for many years, and that led me to being involved with the Rails to Trails Conservancy and Michigan Trails and Greenways Alliance. And I always had a passion for urban riding and having safe access to the roads. So really got involved with that. And of course, with running, I'm very much interested in pedestrian safety as well.
Cool. And are you from that area? What's your
Yep.
kind of personal connection to the place?
Yeah, born and raised in Royal Oak, Michigan, which is, just outside the city of Detroit, and I've been here my whole life.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Well, I think most people have a sense of what a greenway is, but I was hoping you could give us maybe a more thorough or precise definition.
Sure. And I think our definition of greenway in Detroit is perhaps a little bit different from what other people are used to around the country and around the world. So, and this happened very early on. Typically, greenways in other areas are seen as linear parks, long parks with trees and landscaping that are very green and separated from traffic. And early on, we realized that those are great, but those opportunities don't exist in every neighborhood. There aren't abandoned rail corridors or riverfronts where you can build those types of greenways. So we've expanded the definition to include roadways and more than just adding bike lanes to a road or using sidewalks. We expect them to be physically separated from the traffic, and then we can call that a greenway as well. We say it's a green way to get around. It may
Right.
sometimes lack
That's great.
trees, but it's still a green way. And even a third definition now is, in Detroit, the cost of car ownership is so high that if you want to save some green, you can get on these greenways and use biking and walking. So
Right.
yeah, we have a very wide definition of what a greenway is.
Yeah, and, it's ironic, price of car ownership is high in the place that has defined automobile manufacturing in America.
Yes.
And yeah, the car is such an iconic part of Detroit. That's gotta be an interesting context to work within.
It is. So, I like to introduce myself as an advocate for biking and walking in the Motor City, which but there a lot of folks don't have cars in Detroit. Maybe up to a third of the households don't have access to a vehicle or a reliable vehicle. A lot of folks cannot afford the insurance or to operate a vehicle legally in the city, and so biking and walking in conjunction with transit are a good alternative to the expense of owning a vehicle.
Yeah, totally. Well, I live in Buffalo, New York, which happens to be where Frederick Law Olmsted designed the first greenway in an American city. And he was working in the mid-19th century as the Industrial Revolution was taking off, and Americans were becoming more and more alienated from natural areas and green spaces. But now Olmsted's Park has a highway running right through the middle of it, which I think is a crime against art and nature and creativity and American history. Um, this comes out of this like middle of the 20th century when we were building the national highway system, doubling down on designing cities around the automobile, and didn't want to let a few pesky trees and grassy hills get in the way of progress. And it seems like now in the 21st century, there's this much broader appreciation of kind of our the sins of our past, and we're now trying to build greenways again. Can
Yeah, I
you
do think that's true.
Yeah,
I think also, I mean, back in the day, back in the, maybe 100 years ago, you had access to areas outside the city that were the country.
right.
And so it was not that difficult to take a streetcar to get to the country. And with sprawl, that opportunity no longer exists. And so you have to go further and further out. And of course, we don't have the public transit that we did back then. So a lot of folks in the city are disconnected from those countrysides and green spaces that used to be so accessible. And so building greenways within the urban environment is one way to counteract that.
Yeah, totally. Well, do you think at all about these early progressive ideals from, the Olmsted era, that greenways and parks emerged from, and how they're related to what you're doing now with the movement?
Yeah, uh, we do think about things like the mental health aspects and how people need to escape the stress of living in Detroit, which is not the easiest thing to do. And we see it all the time with some of our bike clubs or walking clubs. They're actually support groups that are feel like family, and they love going through these green spaces and greenways, and it becomes a great place to hang out and feel like you're together with friends and family, and you have support, and you can get through all of life's challenges.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, and that makes me think of, this really interesting thing I find about Frederick Law Olmsted again, who, like Charles Darwin, who was his contemporary, he was a fierce critic of slavery. And Olmsted saw greenways and urban parks as places for finding refuge from the industrial city, but also as essential common spaces to bring people together from different classes and races and create this stronger sense of social cohesion. And it feels sometimes like those ideals were torn up along with things like Olmsted's Park in Buffalo, but um, but that seems like a huge part of what Detroit Greenways is doing. Can you talk a bit more about these aspects of the Greenway movement and how they relate to the creation of kind of an equitable and accessible collective culture?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the projects that started in Detroit, I know you have it in Buffalo now, is Slow Roll. And this was something that attracted a wide variety of folks, and all you had to do is have a bike, and you can get together and ride with folks that aren't like you, don't come from your background, and I feel like it was a great mixing pot. It's something you didn't see at sporting events necessarily or other things in the city of Detroit, but on Slow Roll you saw a wide,
Mhm.
diverse group of folks,
And
and I think it was very positive.
a little less hardcore than Critical Mass. Uh,
Yeah. Well, our critical mass isn't too bad because we just don't have much to rebel against. Our critical mass is just a ride, basically.
right. Cool. But yeah, it is related. And how about in terms, we live in a society now where everything is private and everyone aspires to, a single family home with a yard. It's just basically a tiny little private park for everybody. Um, and how do you see greenways as helping us rethink and reshape and maybe correct some of the problems that have emerged from the way we've approached ownership in public space and private space?
Well, even if we only use cars for transportation, we're stuck in our own little area
Right.
and don't interact with other people. At least we don't interact positively with other people on the road. But yeah, so trails are a great opportunity to bring different folks together and bring on chance meetings and one of the biggest projects that's happening in the city right now that we've been involved with is the Joe Louis Greenway, which is a 30-mile trail around the city of Detroit, and it's going through neighborhoods that haven't seen much investment from the city in decades or generations, and it's going to bring people. I mean, first of all, it's going to benefit the people that are there primarily, but it's also going to bring in people that have never been in some of these neighborhoods before. And it's going to be interesting to see how this lifts those neighborhoods up in a positive way and gives them an opportunity to tell their story within this public space and their history and maybe build more empathy between the suburbs and
Right.
the city of Detroit, which would really go a long way for us acting more as a region and not competing against one another.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy how, Buffalo's this way. It's been fractured into all these little fiefdoms and school districts that compete for resources and property taxes and all that
Yeah,
kind of
it's
stuff.
funny because working on trails, and this has been true for as long as I've been involved, is that a lot of these communities don't work together. They don't talk to each other
Mm,
that much. And
mhm.
then trails come through and cross these borders, and suddenly they're talking to with each other.
Yeah, that's super
And,
cool.
it doesn't matter to the trail user what city they're in. They just want to be on the trail.
Right.
But to these cities, there's all this discussion that hasn't happened before. So it can be very positive.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And I really love this idea of how, um, the importance of greenways seems to evolve as our society evolves, and it offers a whole host of societal and ecological benefits at different times in different ways. And now I'm thinking about stormwater management and human health to transportation and safety. Can you talk a bit about this kind of range of benefits that greenways have and how you're working to promote each of those?
Sure. Yeah. And I'm going to use the Joe Louis Greenway as an example because when we started, The whole idea behind this 30-mile trail was there's an 8-mile section of abandoned rail corridor, and we could take one end and wrap around the city and connect to the Riverwalk, and take the other end and wrap around to the other end of the Riverwalk, and that was it. It was going to be a paved path going through these neighborhoods with green stormwater infrastructure, because we've always been a proponent of, bringing in that green landscaping that can soak up some of this rainwater we're getting and reduce flooding. But what happened is the city of Detroit hired a city planner who saw this trail and said, no, this could be much more than just a trail. This greenway could involve neighborhood redevelopment and stabilization. It can bring back retail areas. It could be tied to affordable housing investments. It could help folks as transportation to get to bus stops and to get to school and to work. And so by expanding the definition of what a greenway was, suddenly you could bring in all the neighborhood priorities into this project, and that built more support for the greenway. So, they wanted more park space in some of the neighborhoods. So the greenway expanded to include parks along the way. So by expanding the definition of the greenway and bringing in the neighborhood priorities that they've had for generations, it really helped build much more support for the project.
Oh, that's cool. And, whenever you're talking about urban development and improvement projects, you get into this danger and this issue of gentrification. As soon as an area starts to be wealthier and look nicer and have more businesses, it gets a lot more expensive really quickly, especially in big cities in America. How do you think about gentrification and how to kinda navigate through that and the dangers of it?
Well, to their credit, to the city of Detroit's credit, they actually visited Atlanta and got some lessons learned from Atlanta and their gentrification issue tied to the Atlanta Beltline. And they actually even brought some of their staff up to Detroit to speak to residents. And so the big thing that I think that the city did is, they own a lot of land. The city of
Mm,
Detroit owns a lot of land. And
mm,
so they locked all the land along the greenway so that speculators couldn't come in and buy it all up. And so now they have the opportunity to, maybe create affordable housing options, make sure that the current residents can stay where they are at, not get pushed out either physically or even, psychologically, if
right.
this becomes something different than what they're used to in their neighborhood. So I think it's the city's very well aware of the gentrification issue, and they're trying to avoid it.
That's great. Cool, 'cause that's not often the story you hear. It's often
No,
like
and I think
the
what we
city,
heard.
all they care about is economic development and creating business-friendly environment.
Right. Well, I think what the lesson learned from Atlanta was that they started dealing with gentrification once the trail was built, and it was too late at that point.
Right, right, starting from the
So
beginning.
with Joe
That's smart.
Lewis, they started from the onset.
Oh, that's awesome. And can you tell me about Vision Zero? What is that, and how do greenways fit into this broader issue of traffic safety?
Sure. Vision Zero is a international movement to only have to say that only zero deaths and zero serious injury accidents are acceptable on our roads. And the other aspect of it too is they think everyone is involved in making these roads safe. So what often happens here in Michigan and around the United States is engineers build roads to spec, and then they say now it's up to road users to use them correctly, and they kind of walk away from the issue. They don't track the crashes and that happen on their roads. So and you just can't educate your way out of these crashes. You can't keep telling people not to speed. It just doesn't work. You can't law enforce your way out of these crashes. So, it's a whole new approach to looking at roads, and you look at the roads that have the highest crashes because the crashes aren't evenly distributed. There's some roads that are designed worse than others and
Right.
encourage more speeding, and so you fix those roads first and try to get down to zero deaths and zero serious injury crashes. And I'd say the reason we're involved because the folks that suffer the worst in road crashes are pedestrians and bicyclists because we're the most vulnerable. We don't have the airbags and the metal cages around us,
Right.
and in Detroit, about a third of all the road fatalities are bikes and pedestrians. It's been that way since 2004. So
Oh, wow.
if people don't feel safe walking and biking, they're not going to. And so this is a really important issue to us, and making sure that we get down to zero as soon as we can, so more people feel safe, especially younger people, maybe older people, those who aren't as confident as the typical stereotypical cyclist who wears lycra and goes fast, who they're going to be
Right.
fine no matter what happens. Not we're not so concerned about them. It's is everyone else.
Right. Yeah, and, I spent most of my adult life in Austin, Texas, and, um, there was this period, maybe 10 years ago, where I think over the course of about a year, I knew of or was friends with someone who knew someone who had been hit on their bike by a car, and I knew about 6 of those incidents in the course of a year, and I was just shocked by it. I was just like, "Man," some I don't think anyone died, but a couple people came real close to it, and it's really a big issue. How have you seen that issue of evolving and both in Detroit, but also, what are you seeing nationally as kind of the keys to figuring that situation out?
Well, I think the key to the whole thing is reducing speeding. And we've seen speeds increase during COVID, especially in 2020, where there were fewer cars on the road and people felt they could go a lot faster, and perhaps there was less law enforcement too. And as a result, we saw a dramatic increase in deaths. We had 190 people die on our roads in 2020, and
Oh,
just in the
wow.
city of Detroit.
Wow.
It's gone down in 2021, so that's a positive, but we still have extreme speeding, which has led to a citywide speed hump program. They're installing speed humps in the residential areas to try to slow down some of the speeding, and it's been very well received. It's not a long term perfect solution, but it has been making some difference in the short term.
Oh, wow.
Um, but yeah, the amount of deaths are it's tragic, and unfortunately, in the past, it was considered, well, these people were doing something wrong. That's why they got
Right,
hit. Especially pedestrians and bicyclists, they always get blamed,
right,
and we see it even within law enforcement. Our state police publish information for pedestrians to be safe, which they clearly don't understand what the law is and the priorities that pedestrians and bicyclists get. And they're all about making sure cars can continue to move at speed.
right.
And that has been the priority over the safety of everyone in the community. And so hopefully with Vision Zero and what's called a safe streets approach, we can change that so that safety becomes the number one issue.
Awesome. Well, let's talk a bit more about cycling. In 2007, when Greenways was founded, there were 13 miles of bike lanes and trails in the city, and now there are about 300 miles of bike lanes and trails. So that's a big jump. How did that happen? And what do you see as some of the consequences of that change over that decade and a half?
Yeah, so I say a couple of things happened with the trails. We just had a lot of these nonprofits continue to build their trails, and so that contributed to things like the Detroit River Walk and the Concrete Greenway. But then we also were able to flip a switch with the City of Detroit's Department of Public Works, where we got them to put bike lanes in, the most basic bike lanes to begin with. They have to repaint the roads every year, no matter what. And we said, why don't you just paint them differently? It's not going to cost you much. Paint is 86 cents a foot or something like that.
Right,
And we eventually got to them, and they switched, and they started doing the standard bike lane that you might see. It's not protected or separated from traffic. One The next thing that really happened, the next big milestone, was the former transportation commissioner for New York City, Jeanette Sadik Khan, was working for Bloomberg Associates, and Bloomberg was was embedded in the city of Detroit to help us get us through bankruptcy. And one day, Jeanette Sadat Khan gave a presentation to the mayor and his staff about what they did in New York. And I was told that about 10 seconds into her presentation, the mayor stopped her and said, before you go any further, you have to answer this question. I was in New York. I stepped out of my hotel. The cars are all backed up in the street, and you took away a lane of traffic for bikes. Why did you do that?
Wow.
And she presented the data. She said, well, actually, the cars are moving a little better than they were before. We have more people riding bikes and and New Yorkers are living longer. And the businesses along these streets with bike lanes are doing, X% better than the ones that don't have bike lanes.
Oh, wow.
And I was told, I was not at the meeting, but I was told that the mayor switched 180 really quick because, it's Jeanette brought data. The emotional appeals for safety and bike lanes weren't really working, but when you can bring the data to show the facts that these provide a positive benefit to the community and to the city, that really gained some traction for us. And then we began doing some projects similar to what New York City was doing, adding more protected bike lanes, closing down sections of roads for pedestrian plazas, and going all in on greenways. And so that was a major milestone for the city of Detroit. And now that we've made that investment, we're starting to get data locally to show the same things that New York showed. So, for example, we have really nice sidewalk level bike lanes along the Avenue of Fashion in Detroit.
Mm.
And we've seen a tremendous improvement in business activity, retail activity on that section. And now we can point to local examples when we're in other communities and say, don't you want that? And people are like, yeah, that would be good.
Well, and there's nothing like improving the business environment to convince politicians that something is worth
Exactly.
doing. Well, e-bikes have exploded in the last few years. What do you think about that trend, and how does it fit potentially into some of these projects and some of the thinking that y'all have around bicycles?
Well, we welcome e-bikes. We think that's a great opportunity. I mean, Detroit can have some long commutes. I mean, we're a fairly large city at just about 140 square miles, and going end to end on a regular bike, pedaling it can be a challenge for folks. So we love e-bikes. One thing we've seen too with group rides, we've seen people come out on these rides when they may not have the physical fitness to do the ride normally, but on an e-bike they can. And as they do these rides more and more, they get more fit. They can reduce the amount of boost that they're
Mm,
using from their e-bikes and increase their range. So see it as very positive. One thing we'd like to see is what we're calling cycle throughways, which are longer stretches of bike routes, whether it's greenway or cycle tracks or bike lanes that don't stop. They don't have stops. And we did a whole study on what that could look like on different types of streets. But then you can travel long distances on an e-bike at 20 miles per hour, and
right.
you can get places pretty quick. You
Yeah,
don't
that'd
have
be
to
amazing.
stop at stoplights and that.
That'd be totally amazing. Well, thinking about the movement to encourage bikes and e-bikes and the creation of more bikeable cities, what part do you see this movement playing in the broader effort to get the world to net zero for carbon emissions? I know you're working with the Michigan governor on that, but what else? How do you think of that more broadly, not just within the state of Michigan, but like as part of this global movement?
Well, I think Michigan's never going to be a leader in green mobility at the state level. We can't admit, we can in one sentence we can say Michigan put the world on wheels. We're going to solve climate change, but you're missing the middle part where we put the world on wheels and help create the largest source of greenhouse gases in the transportation sector. And we're not even admitting that. We can't admit that. Politically or we don't even see it. So how are we going to lead on this when we don't see what our transgressions of the past that continue to today?
Right.
So I mean, I think one area where we as bad and as negative as our high cost of car ownership is in Detroit and the impact it has on folks, the if there's any, and I don't want to say this is a positive necessarily, but it does deter people from driving, and it can be used to get more people on transit and mobility. We just need to start making investments in those so that those are the priority of the community, and those are the first class mode of transportation. It's not a last choice.
Right. Right.
And by doing that, we could, I don't know if we could show the world anything, but we could at least be on par with some of the other nations that have effectively raised the cost of car ownerships through fuel prices and whatnot, and encouraged more investment in public transit and biking and walking. So, I mean, I think Detroit could maybe show the United States more so than the rest of the world.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I feel like with any kind of issues, but particularly environmental ones, we often get in this mode that's kind of filled with despair of like, I live in the United States, therefore, I can't hope this thing will ever happen, or I live in Michigan and I can't hope this thing will ever happen. But what I find really interesting is, while discussions about addressing environmental issues and climate change often involve these huge global changes, like eliminating coal and building a clean energy infrastructure, um, so much of how we're going to get to net zero and a more ecologically sustainable society is through lots of little changes of all kinds all over the world, regardless of what the political structure in that locality or that nation happens to be. Um, and I see, what y'all are doing is a really great example of that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how the type of amazing work that you all are doing in Detroit could spread and be more widely adopted in other cities in the US and the world.
Well, yeah, I think it's interesting. I think what I'm seeing in Detroit is that climate action is not at the forefront of many folks' minds. When they start biking or walking, it's not about climate change necessarily. It's they're doing it because it's fun.
Right.
And we have 80 plus bike clubs in Detroit that are, for the most part, they're not, unlike other cities, they're not fitness based so much. Most of them are social based. I mean, they're clearly getting fitness, but they're not out to get their heart rate really high and see how far they can go and for how fast and to win Strava segments. They're just out there wearing regular clothes, regular people riding through the neighborhoods, and people see that and go, "Wow, that's fun." And once you start biking or to a lesser extent walking, you realize you can get places that are nearby, and you can get to work maybe, and so it's kind of like these bike clubs are kind of like a gateway drug to getting you hooked on cycling, and next thing you know, you're biking more and more, and without intentional purpose, you're reducing your greenhouse gas emissions. So
Right. Right. And starting to become more aware of it and more aware of things like air quality because you're breathing more of it.
that's true. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what are some of the big things you've learned doing this work? And where do you see Detroit Greenways headed from here?
I think I guess the first thing is that we're always changing. Our vision is the same, our mission is the same, but we're adapting to a changing city of Detroit that initially was not here. We were filling a vacuum, doing things that cities do normally. And now that the city has stepped in and really is doing an amazing job with greenways and complete streets, building streets for all users, biking, walking, transit, cars. Um, we're kind of stepping back more into the advocacy role, getting more involved in safety, the analysis of the safety, um, and now getting into climate action. Some things that we're in an area where the city is not fully involved, or perhaps can't be when it comes to advocacy and legislation. And we're also looking at what's our role going to be outside the city of Detroit. We've done work with suburbs around the borders of the city to make sure you can travel, across those borders. But what about the cities beyond that? What's our rule? How do we uh, get things improving in those areas like we've got them going in Detroit? And it's a big question because there really aren't there's not a regional advocacy group for trails or biking and walking. We're the largest regional group of that type in Southeast Michigan. So, I'm not sure what the next steps are. We're still trying to figure that out, but that's the biggest thing. And in terms of lessons learned, the one example I would give is that you got to convince other people to do things for you because we're a small nonprofit. We can't do everything, so we got to be crafty and get convince people that they need to do this. I guess you can see that just as like a policy change or whatnot. And the one example like to give is the Gordie Howe International Bridge, which is being built between Detroit and Windsor, and it's being built by Canada. And initially we got involved a little bit after the project had already started. They'd done a federal study, and the study said, well, maybe we could allow bikes and pedestrians on this new bridge, but we're going to leave it up to customs to make that determination. And in speaking with people, I was told, customs is not going to want to do that.
Right.
you know so we got ahead of the game, and we leveraged our connection to then Senator Carl Levin. We wrote him a letter and said, these are all the reasons why we should have this connection, ecotourism, and just how amazing it would be to ride across this bridge. But of course, customs could say no to all this. So
Mm.
he basically took our letter, put it on his stationery, and wrote the head of Homeland Security, and they came back and said, "Yeah, okay, we'll allow bikes on the bridge."
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, and what was awesome about that too is that Canada's building the bridge, and they thought this was some pet project idea. They weren't taking this idea all that serious from the local member of parliament, and so we gave him a copy of this letter, and he took it, you know, to the minister of transportation and said, "Here, Carl Levin wants this too. This is
Wow.
not my pet project. This is
Wow.
the United States government wants this."
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it became serious, and we brought together a group of folks to talk about tourism and the need to do it because the bridge wanted the data. How many people are crossing the river now with their bikes? And it's like, well, no one. You can't swim across the river. So we brought these groups together and said what it could be. We produced a map with many partners that showed all the great trail systems on both sides of the water, and what it would mean to have those systems connected. And to their credit, the bridge Canada decided to put a trail on this new bridge for bikes and pedestrians, and as a way of being even more green, they decided they're not going to charge tolls for us either.
Wow.
You still have to have your passport, of course, but
Right, right.
you'll be able to ride from Detroit to Windsor and back, and it'll probably be the tallest climb in Detroit. Detroit's pretty flat,
Uh-huh.
and maybe another reason they had an e-bike. Um, and it's going to connect up to the Joe Louis Greenways. So we're going to have
Wow.
this access. You'll be able, people in Windsor or people coming to Windsor through the rail system or along the trail that runs from Quebec to Windsor, the Trans Canada Trail that goes across their entire country. You'll be able to cross this bridge and get onto the Joe Louis Greenway and connect to other trails across Michigan.
Wow. What more can you say about what this work means to you personally? You've already touched on this a bunch, but like really kind of from a intimate, what makes you, give you satisfaction and meaning in the world? Like what does this work mean?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. So in my previous life, I was a software engineer, developing software. And as most folks know, right, as soon as you release your software, it becomes obsolete and you start writing the next version.
Right.
And so, yeah, I remember there's one day I was just stuck in traffic driving to my engineering job, and I was like, what legacy is this? Yeah, I'm getting paid decently for it, but what am I leaving behind? You know, not having had kids or anything, I just didn't have much of a legacy besides, I guess, my running and bike racing for what that's worth. So I really tried to get more into trails and, getting involved in projects like the Joe Louis Greenway, which is, I feel proud to be a part of that. That's a tremendous legacy. The connection across the Gordie Howe International Bridge. These are things that are going to last for generations, and it's super exciting. I would share too that, initially that Joe Louis Greenway was our initial name was the Inner Circle Greenway, which sounds kind of spooky now, but it was just an inner circle within the city of Detroit. And when they tore down the Joe Louis Arena, which was the ice hockey arena on the river, the question was asked, well, how do we honor Joe Louis, the Detroit native and
Right.
world champion boxer? And the idea was, why not rename this greenway after Joe Louis? Which is an amazingly great idea,
Right.
because he was into horses, maybe a little bit of bicycling, but the family said yes, we're all in on this idea. They said because buildings don't last forever, but greenways will,
Right.
and so this was a legacy, for Joe Louis that would be there through the neighborhoods and inspire generations to come. They saw this was very positive, and I spoke with Joe Lewis's son. And I said, "Wow, I really appreciate that you guys came to that position, and you're so supportive of this rail trail project." And he said, "Well, I'm on the board for Rails to Trails Conservancy." And I
Oh,
said, "I
wow.
did not know that."
Wow.
Yeah, so and his son was very much into biking and that, so it was natural for the family to really want to support this. But again, it's about building legacies and leaving something behind that you think is going to last and make an impact on generations to come. I'd add too, one thing that we never saw and never expected in Detroit was the amount of local neighborhood based bike clubs.
Mm,
And like, as I mentioned before, we have over 80 of them now, and they organize these tremendous rides, weekly rides, big events. Um, and they're like slow roll, but they're just not as big, but they're slower. They ride through the neighborhoods at a speed where you can talk to people and say, "Hey, get your bike and join us," or join us next week. And there's music and there's lights, and it's really helping transform the city of Detroit. I mean, unfortunately, we've had a couple of folks have passed, not due to car crashes or anything, but for medical reasons or whatnot. And I've gone to a couple of funerals, and it's amazing what a huge role biking and these clubs and the friendships and the feeling of family has played in their lives. It becomes a major part of some of these Detroiters who, it's talking with one family that, the guy just didn't get much outside his own street.
wow.
That was his area until he started biking, and he felt safe going anywhere in the city. And he started a bike club, and he started representing his bike club at events all across the United States. And it just changed things completely. His whole view of what you can do and what you can mean to this world. And so yeah, it was really reflected in his funeral and that. So yeah, so it's really exciting, and man, I just love being a part of it and helping support those clubs in any way I can. We also have some walking clubs, Girl Trek, and that also do a lot of great stuff too. We're just seeing a lot more action with bikes, perhaps because it's probably a little bit more fun, and they can travel longer distances and get more people together.
Yeah, and I've been, looking through your website. I was struck by the coalitions you've put together. Um, you kind of both politically, but also kind of different communities. Ha- that must that must mean a lot to you in a place that's had so much hardship and so many issues of division within communities. What have you seen there, and how does that kind of impact the way you see the work you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important role for us is to be there in the long run and to be consistent and honest and transparent and interact with all these other groups, create these connections, and people feel it feels like people trust us. So a lot of the bike clubs trust us, and we're honest with them. We're trying to advocate for things that help them and help them. In some ways, or in many ways, they're helping us by having more and more people get on bikes and ride. So it's mutually beneficial. But we're there in the long run. I mean, city administrations can change, staff can change, and then you have to rebuild that trust again. But with us, we've been pretty consistent, and we work with just about everybody. I won't name them, but a couple groups that don't work with us or don't work with anybody because they feel they don't have to work with anybody. They've got the money and they think they're smarter than everyone else. But for
Mm,
the most part, those are the exceptions. We typically work with everyone to get things done.
right, right.
I would mention one other thing too that's kind of funny that we got very much involved in, and that is the Michigan Department of Transportation had a plan to widen a freeway right through the heart of Detroit. And they also wanted to add service drives because there were no service drives. And that's because their mentality is, oh, look, no service drives. We need to add service drives. They didn't consider that maybe they're not necessary. Maybe there's already streets there. Maybe service drives only
What's a
work in
service
areas
drive?
where there isn't a street grid.
What a service drive, is that the road that runs parallel to the highway?
Yep.
What is it? Okay.
Yep, it runs parallel to the highway, and largely why they like service drives is if there's a crash on the road, where are their cars going to go?
Mm,
And
mhm.
we said, well, listen, you don't need to tear up all these buildings and houses and put in these service drives. There's a road network, and people nowadays have Google Maps. They can figure out how to get places. You don't
Right,
have to provide these parallel routes and divide our midtown area even more than the freeway already does.
right.
And they
Yeah,
they
in Texas.
basically said, yeah, that's a great idea, but
Yeah.
we already got approved by the feds to do this. So sorry,
Oh,
Charlie.
oh, no.
So the city got a new planning director, and one of the first things we did was went on a bike tour of the project with MDOT and their representatives, and one of the stops are like, yeah, we're going to take this road here, which is a nice residential street, and turn it into a service drive, and you might get a little upset because you're going to lose on street parking. And I go to the planning director. I go, no, you're going to be upset because this street is on has a school on it with school children that are now going to be on a service drive.
Oh my
And oh,
goodness.
by the way, they're going to have to tear down this recording studio where every single Funkadelic album was ever
Oh, wow.
recorded.
Oh, wow.
And he just goes, yeah, MDOT, I'm seeing something completely different here. So then
Wow.
the light bulb went off in my head. It's like, oh, I don't need to convince MDOT anymore. I just need to convince the city.
Right. Wow.
So the next stop on our bike tour, MDOT's like, yeah, we're going to tear down this bridge. I go, we can't do it. Got a school right here. And the city goes, yeah, that bridge stays.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I think in part, this was right at near or during the Flint water crisis, and the executive branch of the state government was reeling from that. I mean, here's tremendous damage that's been done to one of the major communities in the state of Michigan. Are they going to do the same in the city of Detroit with this highway project? And so I think the mayor had a little bit of an upper hand to say, no, you got to do this right. So what they did is they reopened the whole federal approval project and re-examined what they could do and for non-motorized, and they got rid of all the service drives they were going to put in.
Wow.
All the bridges got improved. We got a lot of bridges saved. I think they're going to remove 9 bridges. We got most of those saved and new bridges added. And we have these pedestrian bridges that MDOT doesn't want to maintain very well, if at all. And we got those converted to complete streets. So it's a really calm street without a lot of car traffic that has bike lanes and nice sidewalks that aren't, way high up in the sky, where it doesn't feel safe to walk or bike. So, I know some people are still upset that another lane of traffic's being added to the freeway, but I mean, we can only win so much. But we
Right.
we did get the bridges restored, service drives removed, and biking and walking are going to be improved as a result.
That's great. That's amazing. I'm a biker who had children and stopped biking as much. I commute to work on a bike, but I don't get out and do recreational, um, mountain biking the way I used to, but I'm trying.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, it's become with sprawl and the congestion and all that. It's just, again, it's separating us from where the mountain bike trails are. You
Yeah,
know,
it's
it
just hard
just
it's hard
takes
that's been our issue here, we just moved here a few years ago, and there is some nice mountain biking here, but it's not right where I live, you gotta get in the
right,
car and drive for a while,
right,
which
which I despise.
Exactly.
I mean, I'll try to ride to some of these, but it can be difficult.
Yeah, for sure.
Detroit is atypical of all the bike friendly cities that people are more familiar with, the San Francisco's, the Seattle, Portland, even Chicago or whatnot. I think we're doing things differently here. Um, we've been off the radar. People don't realize we're building a 30-mile trail that it used to be. We used to think it was going to cost 30 million, but now that its scope has widened, as I'd mentioned, it's now a $240 million trail.
Wow.
I will say though that the state government has contributed 100 million. The city has contributed a significant amount of ARPA funding, and we're hoping some others will officially do so soon too. So it's getting close to being fully funded. But yeah, Detroit's doing a lot of stuff that people don't realize. We have a road network that was built for 2 million people, and then 1.4 million people left. Um,
Mm,
and then we built a freeway network, which drew more cars off the road. So we have really wide roads, which presents great opportunity to take space and build separated bike facilities. I'd say one more thing too about being bicycle friendly is it's really easy to put paint on the road and to build facilities. It's much harder to build a diverse, inclusive biking and walking culture, which I know some cities lack. Because I read about how they've made investments in the predominantly white, more wealthy parts of the city, which is something we have not done in Detroit. Um, and we have the most diverse biking culture in the United States. We're also the center of American black bike culture too. And I mean, these are just I think national groups are starting to see this as important, whereas in the past they probably catered more to those lycra
right.
bicyclists, which I am one. I mean, I wear cotton, I wear lycra, you know. But yeah, I think we will be recognized, maybe next 5-10 years, as one of the great places to ride a bike, especially with the Gordie Howe Bridge, and
Yeah,
this
that's
30
that's
mile
like
loop
a
that's going to be done.
that's like a international destination situation, like, that could produce people having vacations there to do
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. It'll be a bucket list ride.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And we will promote it as such.
Do
We'd
not
love to get
doubt
some
do
more
not
tourism
doubt we
here.
will we will miss that.
Yeah, but I mean, I can't even imagine. I mean, as a if I thought of myself as a tourist on the Joe Louis Greenway when it's built, I mean, you're going to go through some really interesting parts of Detroit and see some really great things, and just the amazing food in Southwest Detroit, the amazing food, the Arabic food in Dearborn,
Mm,
and then you're going through the city of Hamtramck, which has just great Polish food and Bangladeshi food. I mean, what an
wow.
interesting trip this will be. This is not going to be a boring rail trail through the countryside. This is going to be going through these very unique neighborhoods and communities in the city of Detroit and some other nearby cities and connecting them all together. And I think it'll be one thing you'll do the trail once and you're like, oh, we need to do that again.
Right. Let's
We
go to
can't
the
stop
different
everywhere.
restaurant,
Yeah.
different bar.
Yep.
Well, that's super cool. And man, it's just starting to sound a little bit more like Europe too, where you have these vibrant cities that are connected to each other and to the countryside in a way.
Yeah. Well, the mayor has come out in support of the I don't know if it's a 15-minute city or the 20-minute city where residents can walk or ride their bike to get to most of their non-work destinations without having to use a car.
That's awesome.
And in Detroit, that largely means bringing back local retail strips that have been either abandoned or underutilized,
Right.
so that you do have a local bakery to go to or a local grocery store. So you don't have to travel to the suburbs, maybe even have to deal with transit or, traveling longer distances. You can just walk to the store and get everything you need.
Well, how can listeners get involved or support Detroit Greenways? Or if they don't live anywhere near Detroit, maybe they want to support you anyway. But like, what are some suggestions of getting involved in something like what you're doing, but in other places?
Well, I'd say, if you want to support us, a couple things you can do. One, I mean, the easiest is to follow us on our social media or subscribe to our newsletter, which is something you can do from our website. Of course, we're always open to donations. I mean, we're always trying to find money to keep this coalition moving forward. We've relied a lot on donations and philanthropy, but yeah, spend some time on our website, learn about what we do, and I'm sure there's plenty of lessons that could be applied in other areas too.
Well, awesome, Todd. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really great to see how all these things fit together.
Yeah, well, since you're just in Buffalo, you have to come visit us, and I'll
Yeah.
take you on a bike tour.
That would be amazing. I would love to do that. Thank you so much for listening to the Chrysalis Podcast. Please subscribe at johnfiege.earth, where you can also find show notes and all episodes of the podcast, plus my writing, photographs, and films. I want to send a very special thank you to all of our paid subscribers. Your membership allows us to grow, flourish, and remain free and ad-free for everyone. Your belief in the work that we're doing and your generous support mean the world to me and the podcast team. Thank you.